So my name's Matt Lesak. I'm a senior product strategist for MobileIron. I love stats, so I try to throw up as many as I can that are relevant. These slides will be shared, so you don't have to worry about taking pictures. I have links to these where I pulled this data from, so when you get them later on, you can get that information within the presentation notes. So this data came out from Gartner, I believe it was in the March timeframe. And essentially, this has pretty much, in general, been the same for a while. And this is the global market space. So 80% of mobile devices globally run Android. Now, when you go into an enterprise environment, it tends not to be this way, right? It tends to be much more iOS. But that has been changing dramatically for a lot of our customers. So if they were iOS adopting first, and now, especially if they're leveraging BYOD type programs, they're seeing much more and more Android come into their workspace. But good stat, Windows Mobile still hanging in there, 1.1%, and we'll see what happens there, what Microsoft's going to be doing in that space next. Now, this is for all of 2015. So the various, from the hardware vendor perspective. So forget the OS, but Apple, right, that's their own entire stack. Samsung has 22.5% market share of overall devices, which, that's pretty what I expected to see. But the one that's been very, very surprising is Huawei. It's not Hawaii, it's Huawei. I had to learn that. And then I have a Huawei watch, which gets even more interesting. I'm waiting for the third W, whatever they're going to come out with. But Huawei is taking some of the market space away from market share from Samsung. I was at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona in February, and they had a very significant presence there. They're marketing very heavily to go into this space. They actually make the Nexus 6P for Google. That's their hardware. LG does the 5X. Google's really good about showcasing their partners. So if you've seen the 6P, that's actually a Huawei phone. So again, just some interesting stats to kind of start off with where we're going in this market segment. So real quick, from an agenda perspective, I want to touch on some of the business use cases around Android adoption, the support model to take into consideration. Again, I've heard talk again a lot of partners and customers around, hey, how are you supporting Android? Or the concern is, how do I support Android? Right? It's multiple variations of hardware out there, different versions and flavors of the OS. What can we do in that space? Which container strategy do I look at? What are we thinking from a strategic perspective? What do we want to adopt? Last, we'll touch on quickly on why devices matter in this space. And lastly, I having their partner up. A lot of customers that have done large adoptions of Android devices have been more successful when they leverage their partner in our ecosystem. And I'll touch on that in the last segment here. So let's jump in to the business use cases. So what's your compelling event, right? What's driving the Android adoption in your workspace? We want to empower users to leverage their personal mobile device to gain access to corporate apps and data in a secure manner. Very formal statement that I captured there, but BYOD, right? This was exactly what, hey, many customers, they don't want to own any devices. They want to allow their employees to bring in their own devices, and that's going to bring in Android, right? Just go back to the stats, right? 80% of the market share, you're going to get Android devices within your organization. Our point of sale solution no longer supports our business needs. So think of any restaurant, right? Any retail organization that they want to use specialized point of sale type solutions. A lot of those run on Android. A lot of them run on iOS too, but when you look at the global stats, predominantly running Android. And you mentioned Barry's keynote this morning, right? Where he had the airline, that was an Android-based tablet. Every airline I've ever flown, I've always tried to see if I can get the screen to pop up and let me see what was behind the screen. Always been Android. BlackBerry is no longer meeting our productivity needs. And this one I had in here is a very common discussion I've had with customers around, hey, we're moving off of BlackBerry, what options do we have? They don't want to consider, whatever reason, iOS is not something they want to take into consideration, and I'll talk about that later on. But there's some really good solutions out there from a hardware and software stack, from a security model, especially in the regulated industry where BlackBerry tends to be very, very strong with our partnership with Samsung. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. We want to enable our mining operations team with mobile apps in order to reduce operational costs. This one particular customer had looked at the market segment because they needed something that was very, very rugged, right? So thinking mining, right? It's not a very mobile, or you're not going to take your Android tablet without some sort of specialized case or hardened solution into those types of environments. So very hostile environment from a physical perspective. So they had looked at some of the vendors out there that have come up with these solutions, and again, the majority of them running Android. The one interesting trend that I've noticed probably within the last 6 months is this one. I try to paraphrase this from a couple of conversations I've had. We had a BYOD model, but we are now shifting to corporate-owned and managed devices due to, and I left that kind of open because it's very country specific, right? So depending on which region you're in, which country you're in, the one conversation I had with this particular customer, there were some privacy law changes within their providence. So it was forcing them from they were a legal firm to look at, okay, what are our terms of agreement that we've had with our end users around mobility and BYOD? And when, based on their examination of the new privacy laws, the agreement says that, we can't allow BYOD anymore. Even though that's what they wanted to do, but they didn't want to cross that threshold of, okay, are we leveraging somebody's personal device now for work? Are we going to violate a privacy law? And that was one of many conversations I've had. So this will be interesting to watch. And the good thing is that there's a lot of good options out there if they wanted to go on an Android platform, what they could do there. And it kind of fits into the mold really well for corporate owned, because in a corporate environment, you now are going, if you're going to own it, you can control the device, right? Which manufacturer you're going to be using, the carrier you're going to be using. So you get kind of eliminate that wild card of you don't know what device is going to be coming in, you don't know what OS, what version of Android they're going to be running. It kind of simplifies the model, but there's definitely some solid solutions out there. So speaking of support models, some things to take into consideration that kind of go with the Android ecosystem. Resources to require your mobile deployment. So this has been something that fascinates me with each customer I've talked with. From the spectrum of, we don't outsource anything, we have 2 people, they manage 10,000 devices, and they're responsible from procurement to end of lifing that device. And I thought, wow, that's a lot for 2 people. But they've made it work, right? They've kind of set the ELA with their end users around what they can expect as far as when they place an order to when they can actually get the device, when it's going to get provisioned, all the kind of things that go into that whole product life cycle on a mobile device. So something to consider from the other end of the spectrum is, hey, is there a way, I don't have 2 people I can dedicate, we're very resource constrained, what are options do I have? We have a lot of partners out there, from a carrier perspective, from just mobile consulting firms that can help you with that whole life cycle, meaning they'll integrate with the carrier, make sure they can do the provisioning for you, they can do the inventory, they can deliver it, they can do the support aspect of it. A lot of good options out there, but again, that's going to vary by what industry you're in, what the culture is, what the legal aspects of it, what the ELA expectation is around from your end users. A lot of these varying factors are going to drive what you end up doing in that space. But the takeaway is know that there are some really good options out there. If you haven't taken a look at it, especially from a carrier and from a partner perspective, that can, again, referring back to the keynote this morning, with the Queensland Police, right? They're not in the business of procurement and mobile management, and that's not what they do. They're the enforcement branch of the law in Australia. That's not what they wanted to do. So they partnered, with the local regional partner there to help them and offload that entire, that responsibility that they would have to take on internally and get back to focusing on what they do from a business perspective. Device and or user provisioning. So I had this up here because when you look at what you're doing from a deployment strategy. So are you going to look at it from so I'll pick on one use case. So if you're going to do BYOD and they have their own device, so some of the things you have to take into consideration is, so am I going to look at this from basically separating the user data from the device, or do I give them the device themselves so they can just leverage it from a corporate perspective, use it for corporate use, but do I allow them to do personal things on that device as well? Again, a lot of things to take in consideration. Do I want my users to do their own provisioning? Do I want to do self-service? Do I want to have them do their own support? So it's a very interesting model because of the Android ecosystem. It's so vast and so varied. It's kind of Android's or Google's battle cry, really. Many devices but one platform. That's a good thing because it gives you choice, but there's some caveats to that. So how you're going to support it, how you're going to provision, how you're going to separate the user's personal side or their personal application from the corporate data, and do you want to allow them to take a device that's owned by the company, right, owned by your corporation, owned by the enterprise, that's locked down per se, meaning that, hey, you own it, you can wipe it, you can brick the device if it gets stolen, but you still want to empower them to use it from a personal perspective. What are the risks involved with that model? To own or not to own, or both. So again, going back to, do we want to own the device? Do we not want to own the device? Do we want to allow BYOD? Are we going to have a mix? And most customers have a mix. They'll have a certain segment or line of business that has to be owned. They have to make sure it's the right model, it's got the right rev of Android on it. If the device is lost, they got to ensure that they can actually wipe the entire device, not just the corporate data side of it. If they allowed, again, the user and the corporate containers to be separated, when you go from the BYOD model, are the end users informed on what they can and cannot do, or what are you actually able to see on that endpoint, right? Can I see their personal photos? A lot of the feedback that we've gotten from users is, what are my, if I do a BYOD, or they don't call it BYOD, but hey, I have my personal device, I want to get to my corporate resources, what can they see in my device? I cannot emphasize enough that if you spend some of that time educating your users up front, which we all know they don't read anything, no matter how much you try to tell them this is what you do and don't do, a lot of education up front goes a long way, and we have a feature within our product that shows customers, hey, what can my organization do or not do to my device on a BYOD type deployment. But again, just letting them know that feature is there goes a long, long way. Carrier or partner alignment. So do you have a good relationship with a partner or a carrier in this type of model? So if you're going to own your own devices, right, if you want them to have to be provisioned, going back to again, if the break fix from a device perspective, what if the device breaks? What's the model look like that? How long can I expect that particular mobile device to get repaired? I talked to a lot of customers that had gone down the iOS path and now they're looking at Android, but it changes a little bit because maybe the partner or the company that they were purchasing their devices from don't have anything in this particular space, or maybe they focused solely on iOS. Not very common, but again, it's something that I've talked to some customers around that, and I cannot emphasize enough that this is critical, right? You want to make sure that you're involving your partner, you're involving the carrier, or the partner's involving the carrier, and what you're trying to accomplish from a business perspective in that use case. Outsourcing options, I've already talked about this many times. Take a look at your entire your life cycle of that device and look for opportunities to where it makes more sense to outsource instead of taking that internally. Allow those internal resources to do other things instead of break fix or provisioning, and leverage them as much as possible. The most successful deployments I've seen, they have leveraged that model to furthest extent. Actually, one particular customer comes to mind where they literally, it's almost entirely hands off. They only do some of the management from a MobileIron perspective. They don't ever touch the devices. It's all done and managed for them, and all they get is the reports back and all the typical cost reporting and how much maintenance has been involved or whatever that cost structure they've established with that outsourcing vendor. They get that data back, whereas if they did it internally, they'd have to develop all of that, right? They won't have that data readily available. They have to come up with it on their own. From a container perspective, so when you talk Android, you have to talk about Android for Work. We have our App Connect solution. We've had it for quite some time. And the reason I bring this up is I've talked to some customers say, look, we've talked to Google. Android for Work is the way we want to go. And I ask them, okay, well, great. So what do you think? Are you going to do BYOD? Or are you going to do corporate owned? They're like, oh, we're going to do BYOD. Well, there's some challenges with that. Not every Android device out there is Android for Work capable. And that's a big challenge for some of the customers that have gone down this early and didn't really do their homework on what's required to make Android for Work devices, making sure those devices are compatible. And unfortunately, there's over 50% of the devices that are still out in the Android ecosystem aren't Android for Work capable. So that really narrows down your options. Now, if you're going down the other path of saying, no, we're going to do corporate owned, we're actually going to be buying these devices, then it's a different ballgame, right? You're taking that variable and you know exactly what device you're going to get. You can test that up front. You can do your due diligence before you're deploying those out and making sure, hey, if I'm going to go Android for Work, I've got the right device, it's going to be supported, and your success rate dramatically increases. Now, if Android for Work isn't something that you want to consider, or you want to maybe do both containers because maybe Android for Work is something strategic for you and you know that a subset of my devices aren't going to work, we have App Connect. App Connect can work on all the devices that don't support Android for Work. Or if you want to just strategize on one container until the devices, the amount of devices that can run Android for Work increase, right? So that it goes below that 50% threshold in the ecosystem until your probability of finding those devices that will be supported continually go up. And then BYOD on Android for Work becomes more of a logical solution as time goes on. Trust me, Google would love to fix that problem. They would love to wave the wand and say, hey, all Android devices can support Android for Work, but that time will just fix that issue. They're changing a lot of the policies and a lot of their the engagement model with their OEMs. So think about all the hardware manufacturers they work with and saying, look, we got to get this pushed out quicker. We got to make sure these devices are capable, compatible, because if you go back to when Android for Work was released, it came out with Lollipop. Well, Google said at that point that all devices running Lollipop have to support Android for Work. Well, then all the OEMs said, whoa, time out. All of our testing, we didn't even go down and start looking at if we did because whole device encryption is a requirement for Android for Work. If you don't do it, if you enabled it on a lot of the devices at the time when Lollipop was launched, majority of them would brick, or the performance was so slow and unacceptable that it was not going to be a viable user experience. So they kind of reeled back on that and said, okay, well, we would really like for you to support Android for Work on these devices, and there had to be some compromises made. Marshmallow, they were much more clear. They came out with the same statement that any new device running Marshmallow had to be Android for Work capable, but there are exceptions, like a watch. So the watch is not going to support whole device encryption, right? It was never designed for it. It's a very purpose-built device. Or some other type devices that are purpose-built that nobody would put Android for Work on that to begin with, right? It doesn't make any sense to do it. So there still are some exceptions. We'll have to see what they say about Android N, which I don't know, maybe this week they're going to tell us what N stands for at Google I/O. But again, this is something to take into consideration. But App Connect is our container solution that we developed on our own prior to Android for Work ever being on the radar. So that's another one to take into consideration when you're looking at those different options. The third one that we do support, and a lot of customers, especially in the regulated industry, so think highly regulated government type use cases, leverage Samsung Knox. The difference with Samsung Knox is it's an entire platform. So you have hardware-based security and software-based security. So their approach is, obviously they make devices, right? So they can control what's in the hardware. They have very specific security chips in the hardware. So you can actually store some of the encryption keys in the hardware itself and not in software. And they leverage their solution, that they have their own container, but they also have embraced Android for Work, right? So they did a joint announcement with Google at Mobile World Congress saying, hey, we are the most secure Android for Work device that you can get in the market. And what they meant by that is on the Knox platform with a Samsung device, you have the most physical and software secure solution in that market. And we see a lot of adoption in that, especially after the BlackBerry type use cases where they have to ensure the device physically is secure and the hardware is secure, and it's a really good solution that a lot of our customers have leveraged, and you're seeing that the uptick in the federal space significantly over the last 6 months. Why devices matter? So factors that impact device selection. So requirements for hardware and software-based encryption. Like I just mentioned about Samsung Knox. So if you have that requirement, that is a great solution to look at. But again, it's something you want to define up front, right? So forget vendors, forget software. When you're looking at your use cases and saying, okay, what do we want to do? Hey, think about some of these factors, right? Do we need hardware-based encryption plus software-based, and what options are out there? Are these devices being exposed to hazardous environments? Again, purpose-built devices, good use cases for Android. Availability and support. And I bring this up because this is very, very regional driven. And what I mean by that, so in the US, iOS, Apple devices very predominant, right? You see them in a lot of enterprises. Now when you go outside the US, whole different ballgame. Anybody ever been to Brazil? It's Android. India, it's Android. If you look at Apple devices in those countries, they're extremely expensive. They're considered like a luxury device. So the market drives, it's a price competitive environments where you're going to see the polar opposite. So Android is very, very predominant in those regions. And then support. So if you are a global organization and you're looking at all these different devices, okay, if I'm going to standardize on one or we want to come up with a set of standards, can I get support in those particular regions on those devices? Is the carrier I partner with, can they support me in those different regions so that I can have a single support model? Device cost impact, mentioned that already. And then I mentioned this earlier, right? So the Android for Work devices that are certified, I have the URL in the notes, so when you get the presentation, it's there. But this is not the single source of truth. If you want to know if it's a particular device, right, they just showcase these devices. This is more of I would call a percentage of devices that they say will support them. I actually have access to a spreadsheet from Google that gets updated daily on which particular devices in which particular region, right? So you guys know if you ever dealt outside the US, one LG phone is not the same LG phone you're going to get in the UK versus, in APAC. So don't view this as if you don't see your device up there, they're going, oh, it's not supported. Work with us, we can help you, or work with your partner, or if you're engaged with Google, they can help you with this and get back to you on, hey, yes, that particular device is supported, Android for Work capable. And partner up. I don't mean to keep repeating myself, but again, the most successful deployments that I've seen in this space is customers that have partnered, right? Either if it's from a provisioning perspective, keeping your costs down from a support perspective, regional support, availability, right? So if you pick a particular model, can I get that globally? Is there a consistency there? And what's amazing is when I've talked to customers and they've gone through this journey, right? So they started off with a pilot and they say, hey, we're going to start in the US with this particular Android deployment. And then they start expanding it outside the US. Then they start realizing, well, wait a second, that one particular device that we've standardized on is not available in Brazil or in Japan or wherever else, Australia. So again, the more homework you do up front in this particular segment, the better off you will be. Again, it's a great platform, but again, because of the openness and because of the empowerment that Google has given their partners, you've got lots and lots of variety, and with that variety comes different challenges.